Heyo, who dat? And welcome. And I am Jeff Nowak. This is Inside Black and Gold. We are going live for the first time in a while. We haven't been doing a lot of live streams lately. Want to get back more into it. We'll get into more of a regimented schedule as we get into this off season. But as always, when we go live, we try to do a mailbag. So keep in mind, back into this program, I'm going to get to as many comments, questions, hot takes, anger, happiness, elation, whatever it is. We'll get to it in the comments. So throw all that into the feed and I'll go throughout the show. Hit as many as I can as we go, but also star them so we can get back to them later. So remember to do that. Otherwise, I will keep rolling through because this is going to be a free agency episode. And there is a lot to get into. You know, not a lot of big names, but a lot of familiar names. And that's what this is going to be about. So this first segment here, we're going to go through kind of the rundown of everything that's happened, of the moves that have happened. Not a ton of huge surprises, but some big names. So we will get to them. Second segment, want to talk exclusively about Chase Young, Juwan Johnson, how we feel about those contracts, why I think they do make sense, even though the numbers might seem big in the moment. I think there is something being clearly projected with those deals. And we also got to talk to Chase Young today. So I have a few clips from Chase. I think his approach is interesting, and we'll get to it from there. I also have some clips from Deuce McAllister talking about these signings, talking about Justin Reid, talking about Juwan Johnson. So we will get to those as we roll through here. But first things first, signings. I'm calling this the bring them back free agency class because it seems like every name that's on this list is a familiar one to some degree, right? Not the most popular name in the world, but one we've heard before. I'll start with the only one that we hadn't really heard before, and that's Jack Stoll, tight end. So you have two tight ends in this class, right? The Saints signed Jack Stoll to a 1-year contract. I saw some folks say, hey, this must mean they're not going to draft a tight end. I don't think any free agent signing in this cycle, and I know we're just jumping right in midstream here, but I don't think any free agent signing in this cycle is going to force you to go into the draft and say, we're good. We don't need to look at that position. So, a Tyler Warren at 9, I was never big on drafting a Tyler Warren at number 9, but I think there's a lot of intriguing mid-round tight end prospects. And if a Mason Taylor drops to me in the 3rd round, I'm jumping on it, right? The kid from Miami, right? Like there's a lot of potential options that you could fill. And Jack Stoll is not taking any of them off the board. So let's just say that right now. He's going to be a blocking tight end option. That's what he's done throughout his career. I mean, you look at I have his stats here. Give me 1 second. He's got 22 catches for 193 yards in his career. Right. We're not talking about a guy that has really done a ton as a pass catching tight end. He's going to be basically, if you remember Josh Hill, that's what you're looking at. If I'm Foster Moreau, I'm kind of looking over my shoulder and saying, could he take my role? I don't think he will, but that's kind of what you're looking at. This is not a guy who's going to come in and be a huge part of the passing game. He is what he is. Now, a guy who is going to walk into a big role is going to be Justin Reid. And, there's a lot of ways you can look at this offseason and say, man, the Saints aren't rebuilding the way I want them to rebuild. They're not tearing things down to the studs. They're still handing out money. And yes, they are handing out some money. But if you look at this and you say, okay, what's the plan here? The plan is pretty clearly, okay, we have musts. We have clear needs that we have to fill in this free agency cycle. And, I think letting Will Harris go to the Commanders, you could have matched 4 for 8. I don't think they had any desire to bring Will back because they had bigger plans in mind. And that bigger plan was Justin Reid, a guy who I think fits what Brandon Staley wants to do a lot more than Will Harris probably did. And, this is a different scheme. This is a different scheme than what you ran under Dennis Allen. And you need more flexibility at the safety spot than what Will Harris was able to provide. Will was more of a box safety. It's funny because I've been on Washington radio stations talking about, okay, Will Harris, Marshawn Lattimore, and he's basically replacing a guy who I would comp him to in Jeremy Chin. It's like they've replaced Jeremy Chin with the closest thing to a Jeremy Chin in the NFL. The Saints don't need that player. What they need is a guy you can disguise looks with, a guy you can plant next to Tyrann Mathieu and have both of those guys be able to fill any role on any particular play. So you can go out there and run a 2-high shell and it can morph into whatever you want it to. There is no scouted look that you cannot get into with that player. And that's what you have with Justin Reid. Now, if his name is familiar, he's the brother of Eric Reid, who is a star safety at LSU. Justin went to Stanford, but he is a Louisiana native. So, kind of fulfilling that theme of, and we've seen this on the coaching staff, we've seen this on the players. A lot of guys have connections to either Louisiana, to coaching the Saints, to playing for the Saints, right? Whether they're coaches coming back after leaving, like a Joel Thomas or a Brendan Nugent, players coming back, Devon Godchaux, we've already talked about that. The Saints traded a 2026 seventh rounder, another Louisiana native, another former LSU guy. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is here now, Tyrann Mathieu, Foster Morrow. So, there was a long time that it felt like Sean Payton was actively avoiding Louisiana ties with his players. And whether that was true or not, you weren't drafting LSU guys, you weren't signing LSU guys. That's clearly changed. Whether that's a active thing or it's just kind of a block taken away, I don't know. But this offseason in particular, you have seen a ton of familiarity in an offseason where I did not expect a ton of familiarity. Like I understood it when it was Dennis Allen, when it was a guy kind of rolling it back and trying to get people on his side. Now it's Kellen Moore, a completely new regime, and you would have expected, hey, the old guard is out. Instead, the old guard is still in. And I know that's going to annoy some folks. I just think it's interesting. And, a lot of these guys have connections to Kellen Moore. So it's not completely, okay, well, they played here before, and a guy we'll talk about is Will Clapp, a guy who's coming back. But, first, let's kind of get into, 3 for $30 million. That's Justin Reid's contract. It fills the trend that the Saints had been going with at the safety position for a while now. If you go back to 2020, they've drafted one safety since drafting Marcus Williams, right? They've drafted one safety in the last 5 years, and that's Jordan Howden, who's a 5th rounder. Since then, they have signed Marcus May, Tyrann Mathieu, Malcolm Jenkins. This is out of order. Will Harris, like guys, and now Justin Reid, all guys that either were assumed a starter walking in the door or made themselves into a starter a la Will Harris, right? So this is clearly a team that wants to mine the safety market in free agency and not the draft for whatever reason. And the interesting thing is we have seen the Saints actually hit on some decent safeties in the draft, like a Von Bell, a Marcus Williams. If you go back to Kenny Vaccaro, like they've been pretty solid in drafting safeties, but at some point they decided, hey, it's not worth it. We're going to sign safeties because we don't want to pay him on that second contract anyway. CJ Gardner-Johnson was also a guy they drafted as a safety, but never really played at safety, right? But here, let's listen to what Deuce McAllister had to say about Justin Reid when he was asked about it on Sports Talk the other day.
You're going to add guys that have been there, kind of done that. I think it obviously helps, from a playmaking standpoint. He's got the credentials, and Mike, really for me, I need to see the fit of the defense. I mean, because with some of the stuff that the Saints have done, obviously with retaining a lot of your players that you've had the last couple of years, but knowing that you will be a multiple defense, but maybe based out of the 3-4 more, then I need to see how they're going to utilize some of those bodies. I mean, because right now, I don't know if you have enough linebackers on that roster to be able to fill it like you need to fill it. And so is Justin going to be a guy that, hey, he's more of my third safety guy? Or now contract tells me that he's going to be on the field a lot, yes, when you look at that contract. And so, I just need to see more. And we just hadn't had a chance to see that. But I definitely like somebody that has kind of been there, done that, and I can play multiple positions. And I think that's where he's going to fit in Coach Staley's defense.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with Deuce there. And I think one of the reasons that you are going into these free agency cycles and saying, hey, I want this guy as a safety, right, is because I think the Saints value veteran safeties. They value kind of a set it and forget it option at safety. And there's been some quality returns on that. Like I don't think that's been an issue for them, the way that some other positions have been an issue for them. And the defensive line, you spend all these draft picks on the defensive line, and those don't seem to work out. But I think I understand why linebacker and safety, in part because the markets for these players are not huge. Like you look at Zach Bond, for instance. Like we're going to talk about the Chase Young contract. Chase Young got 3 years, 51 at a position where guys are getting paid $40 million a year. Or I say guys, Guy is getting paid. Myles Garrett is getting paid $40 million a year. Max Crosby is getting paid $35 million a year. Like these contracts at the edge rusher position are massive. Whereas linebacker, Zach Bond got the same contract as Chase Young, effectively 3 years, $51 million. But at the linebacker position, that's a huge contract. So I just think it is a lot easier for teams to go out in free agency and find a safety or a linebacker with talent that you can kind of fill in. Now, the Saints haven't signed a linebacker yet, and I have a feeling they're going to have to go find at least one inside linebacker. Willie Gay is still out there on the market. I think if you were going to bring him back, you would have brought him back already. But we'll find out. They did tender Nephi Sewell as an exclusive rights free agent. Anytime you have an exclusive rights free agent, it's kind of like the decision isn't so much do you want to bring him back as in like do you hate the guy entirely, because it's basically nothing to bring him back. It's as all you have to do is offer him a minimum NFL contract, and they have no choice but to either take it or retire. Like they can't leave unless you say we don't want you. So bringing Nephi back, I think, is just kind of like, hey, we feel like he can be a special teams contributor, and that's going to be the case for a lot of guys. Dante Pettis was re-signed. He's not a guy you re-sign as a core player. He's a guy you re-sign as a potential special team option. Now, one of the more interesting signings was Ike Yiadom, in my opinion, because the Saints could have signed Ike last year. Ike played here in 2023. I thought he played well, right? If you recall, Marshawn Lattimore went out after that game with the Seahawks. He had like a weird bruise to his spleen or something or other. Ike had also played earlier in the year when Paulson Adebo got hurt. And, Ike had to take on a big role. I think he started 11 games that year. He had a bunch of passes defensed. He had one interception, and I remember it vividly because it came in week 4. And actually, I messed that up with the Marshawn Lattimore injury. The spleen injury came a year before that. I can't remember what he was dealing with, but he was out. Either way, his interception came in week 4 against the Bucs, and I remember because at the time the Bucs were driving late in the first half, and I was like, "Oh man, they're going to score right before halftime. They're going to put this game on ice, basically." And wouldn't you know it, Ike goes up and gets an interception at the goal line, falls into the end zone, and this is when the NFL was deciding, "Hey, now we're going to punish DBs for getting an interception. We're going to punish the defense for making a good play by forcing them to start that drive at the 1 rather than saying, as momentum carried him in," right? So anyway, the Saints get the ball at the 1. They hand the ball to Adam Prentice. Adam Prentice immediately fumbles, and the Bucs go and score a touchdown to Trey Palmer, who was in coverage against Ike Yiadom on the next play. So one of the best plays of Ike's season was turned on a dime, and he got me for a touchdown pass in the end zone. Wasn't exactly fair to him, but either way, that's one of my memories of Ike Yiadom. But, I thought he went in there and he just kind of was a tough player. He went out there and was physical and was willing to be physical, and he was getting attacked, right? I think he had 14 passes defensed, and that's because he went on the field and the other team was like, "All right, Ike Yiadom, we're going at you." And he stood up. Obviously he didn't win all of his reps, but for a guy coming in off the bench to be confident and go in there and play and not be afraid, not play scared, is what you want as your kind of CB3 option. So, he got a 3-year contract. Now it's a 3-year contract worth $9 million. I think only 4 of that is guaranteed. So realistically, it could end up being a 1-year contract for $4 million, but you do have the option to kind of stretch that out. And the Saints love these 3-year deals. That's kind of been the new norm in the NFL. I don't know if it's part because, the CBA is going to be up in a few years, or the TV deal for the NFL is going to be up in a few years, and maybe players are trying to get on the right side of that. They want a contract until that deal is up, and then they can cash in on the back end. But no, so your cornerback room right now, I don't expect any big splashes in terms of a cornerback signing. I think we're pretty close to being done in terms of free agent signings. You could have one or two more names kind of fall in here, but I think you're going to be on the lower end. I'd be surprised if you go after a guy like Cooper Kupp, although I do think there's a wide receiver need here. A guy like Amari Cooper, even though he hates the way New Orleans smells, I still think that he could be a guy. Noah Brown was a guy I was watching. He's signed with the Commanders. Mike Williams went back to the Chargers. Brandon Cooks is out there as well. But, again, you're talking about, veteran options. I don't think you're going to be talking about a huge deal. But right now, your cornerback room is Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid McKinstry. And I think those are your starters, unless something tangibly changes for those guys. And the question becomes, do you want to move Alontae Taylor back into the slot? I will tell you right now, without even talking to Alontae Taylor, he does not want to move back into the slot. He wants to stay on the outside, right? That's what he believes is he is a outside corner, and he knows and is correct in knowing that outside corners get paid, nickel corners get scoffed at. Nickel corners get looked at and said, we can go find another nickel corner. Just ask CJ Gardner-Johnson, a guy who's hasn't had 2 years on the same roster since the Saints got rid of him, which I think is pretty telling. He was just traded, I want to say, to the Texans, so he spent a year with the Eagles and he spent a year with the Lions and he went back to the Eagles. Now he's on the Texans. But no, I mean, one of the problems is nickel corners don't get paid. And so, I think Alontae's going to want to stay on the outside, and I think he was fine on the outside. I think he was kind of thrown in midstream after spending, it's 2 years in a row, right? Where 2 years ago you had him working outside basically all camp, and then at the very end you threw him inside. Last year you had him working inside all camp, and then in week 9 you had to throw him outside, and he played outside the rest of the year. So my hope for Alontae Taylor is that whatever they decide to do with him in this defense, they at least give him a fair shot to work at that position all through training camp and then play that position all year. Because, I think he would have been better off at the nickel 2 years ago had he worked at the nickel in training camp and actually learned it. I think he would have been better outside last year had he played outside all training camp. So I just need a vision for that guy so that he's not constantly being put in under-leveraged positions. Now, the good thing is I do feel confident that if you need him to play the nickel, he can. And if you need him to play outside, he can. The guy I'm hopeful can take a big leap with a full offseason is Kool-Aid McKinstry, a guy that I wouldn't say that I was particularly impressed with. I don't think he was terrible, but I think he was just frustratingly raw to the point that he was getting attacked in coverage and he was getting beat in coverage. And whenever a team feels confident attacking you in coverage, I don't care how good you are, you're going to get hung out to dry at points, and then you're going to lose confidence. So I just need him to show up and be confident. I do still think the Saints are going to go after a cornerback with a premium pick. Now, Will Johnson at 9, I'd be perfectly fine with it. It would be a little premium for my pick. I still want an offensive lineman. I still want a tackle, to be completely honest. If Will Campbell's there, I want Will Campbell. But I do think that you're okay at corner right now. The one guy we haven't really talked about is Will Clapp. The meme is back. If anyone doesn't know the Will Clapp meme, I'm not going to explain it to you, but it's kind of funny. Either way, Metairie guy, another LSU guy, he's back in the fold. But it's not just LSU. Will Clapp was with the Chargers. He left in 2022, joined the Chargers. Who would show up in 2023? But Kellen Moore, Brendan Nugent was his offensive line coach. So I think this is a scenario where you bring a guy in who knows your offense, especially at the center position. He can communicate a lot. He can explain a lot to the offensive line and help you install that. I don't expect, I saw some people saying like, hey, this guy's going to be your starting left guard. I don't buy that. He's played primarily at center since leaving the Saints. He started 11 games at center for the Chargers in 2022. 2023. I think that's where you are. He also spent time with the Bills. I think Will Clapp is now your depth center who doesn't technically even have to make the roster to fill that role. I would actually expect him to be cut, land on the practice squad, and then be elevated as needed. Hopefully, he's not needed, right? Hopefully, Eric McCoy does not miss 10 games again, because we saw, I don't care how good your backup center is, you lose Eric McCoy and things change for you on offense. But, I do like the idea of having a kind of veteran entrenched option at center, so you are not trying to go find Connor McGovern, whichever Connor McGovern you want to talk about, off a practice squad, right? And throw him in midweek and say, well, if he's not terrible, that's a win, right? Like, I like the idea of having a guy who knows the offense, who's familiar, and he's still a jumbo tight end option if you need it, right? But I would kind of expect him to be that guy who starts on the practice squad, gets elevated 3 times, because he can do that. He can play jumbo tight end. He can play tackle in a pinch. I'm not saying he should play tackle. I'm just saying, like, he has flexibility at positions that would be attractive on a practice squad from a call-up perspective. But no, he's a guy you bring in, and we'll see how that goes. I am interested to see if the Saints try to pinch a comp pick out of this equation. I don't know what it would look like. I think MVS cancels out Justin Reid, and then you still have the Paulson Adebo contract on top of that. So it's really just a question of what qualifies. But I do think that you are in a position where you could theoretically get a solid comp pick for next season. And we didn't mention it. Paulson Adebo went to the Giants on a pretty big deal, a 3-year, $54 million contract. And I kind of look like, if that's the deal you had to match to bring Paulson Adebo back, then buy. Like, I get it. Like there's no reason to spend that money. And, we'll talk about this more in the next segment, but one of the things working against Paulson Adebo in that situation is it's all new money, right? The Saints were in a position where they were better off pushing old money forward if you could, whereas new money would be a brand new contract for a guy that you are not on the books for at all. When people want the Saints to rebuild, when people want the Saints to tear it down, that's what you have to do, is you have to resist the urge to create new money when it's not worth it. And if you could have gotten Paulson back on a 3-year, $30 million contract like you got Justin Reid, that's a different story than 354, which is up there toward the top of the cornerback market. Will Harris, 2 for 8. MVS is out with the Seahawks, and he got a 1 year something. I think it was like $5-point-something million contract. Reunite with Clint Kubiak. So I kind of see that as a reasonable result. Now, I think where people are going to get frustrated is the lack of fresh in this situation, right? Basically, this entire list, the only new name is Justin Reid. Everyone else is familiar. And the way to read that, and the only way to read that, is the Saints did not necessarily view this roster as the biggest barrier to competing last year. They viewed the injuries as the biggest barrier to competing last year. Now, I think there is some hypocrisy going on in the sense that, like, okay, if you thought that Dennis Allen was a quality coach and you didn't want to fire Dennis Allen, then it was the roster, because otherwise I don't know how you can argue both ends of that equation, but either way, you're going to get something similar to that. And I don't know that you're seeing a team that is saying, hey, we're there, we're going to push all our chips to the middle of the table. I think you're seeing a team that's rebuilding, and they're doing it in the way that they can. And that way is extend players that are worth extending, sign players where you have a red tag on the board for a massive need, and otherwise keep it to reasonable short-term deals with money involved, or, low budget, high floor deals, like an Ike Yiadom for 3 years, $9 million. A guy a guy you're familiar with. One thing I didn't mention with Ike, so there is a link there beyond playing in Dennis Allen's scheme. He did spend the 2024 season with the 49ers. Brandon Staley was their assistant head coach. Didn't run Brandon Staley's defense, but they did work together. So there has to be some level of familiarity there. He also spent 2019 on the Broncos, where Brandon Staley was a defensive assistant. I need to check. What was Brendan Staley's role? I keep saying Brendan or Brandon because there's a Brendan Nugent and a Brandon Staley, and there are two different versions of that. Okay, so on the Broncos, yeah, he was an outside linebackers coach. So again, not a situation where Brandon was necessarily coaching Ike, but they are familiar with each other. And I think that's we're trying to figure, okay, why are you bringing this guy in? Why are you bringing this guy in? Why'd you sign Jack Stahl? Well, Jack Stahl was on the Eagles with Kellen Moore, right? Will Clapp was on the Chargers with Kellen Moore and Brendan Nugent. Ike Yiadom was on the 49ers with Brandon Staley. So that's really what you're looking at. But this is by no means a non-rebuilding free agency cycle. This is really a continuation of last year, with the exception being you spent a little bit more on safety. You kind of gave the Marcus May contract to Justin Reid, right? Now you can look at it and say, well, I didn't like that Marcus May contract because it was a bad contract. And I agree it was. You gambled and lost on Marcus May. But I think there were a lot more red flags with the Marcus May contract in terms of the Marcus May situation. Whereas I think Justin Reid is a bit more of a sure thing. It's also kind of fascinating when you kind of look at the totality of Justin Reid's career, which, like Tyrann Mathieu, started on the Texans and then went to the Chiefs in 2022, where he replaced Tyrann Mathieu, who that same offseason signed with the Saints. 3 years later, 3 Super Bowl appearances later, 2 Super Bowl wins later, Justin Reid is now teaming up with Tyrann Mathieu on the Saints. Tyrann Mathieu, a former teammate of Eric Reid at LSU. So it's kind of this weird flat circle situation. But we'll see. I'm cautiously optimistic that this season can be, if nothing else, entertaining. I don't have high expectations. I think it's just as likely they win 5 games as they win 9 games. But if, those 7 and 9 Saints seasons are the ones I go back to, right? The Drew Brees 7 and 9 seasons. What made them watchable? They were immensely frustrating because you knew Drew Brees was that guy, and you knew Sean Payton was a Super Bowl caliber coach, but you weren't getting there. So that's what made them incredibly frustrating. But like, those games were still entertaining to watch. I go back to that Giants game. I think it was 2015. I can't remember the year exactly. I think it was 2015. I think the score was 51-48. It was the Brad Wing face mask on the kick return. Willie Snead, I want to say. Drew Brees threw for 7 touchdowns. Eli Manning threw for 6 touchdowns. Like, Saints won that game. That Giants team wasn't any good. They allowed 48 points to that Giants team, but the game itself was incredibly entertaining. And even in the midst of a 7 and 9 season, you could always get on board with, well, we're going to watch something interesting. And in the last 3 years have been anything but interesting or fun. So that's kind of my hope, is that even if things are ugly, and it could be ugly, that you can at least get an offense on the field that is fun to watch. So we'll see how that goes. Either way, Justin Reid, Jack Stoll, Will Clapp, Ike Yiadom, not really Dante Pettis. Dante Pettis is a re-sign, not really a free agent class. So that's kind of your 4-man free agency class if you want to throw Devon Godchow in there. Now, again, this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. We're reacting to Saints free agency. We're going to hit the break, come back. I want to talk about Chase Young, Juwan Johnson. I want to hear from Chase Young, talk about his approach to this offseason. He's feeling healthy. He's feeling good. He wants to be here. All that good stuff. We're going to hear from Deuce McAllister on his hope for Juwan Johnson. I think he made some good points, and we'll talk more about if his contract is reasonable, where it kind of lands in the tight end scale. Get into more questions, comments. Again, this is Inside Black and Gold. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Otherwise, we will be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak coming at you live here on Thursday at about 3:30 p.m. I only make note of the time because if you end up on this video after 3:30 p.m. on Thursday and you're wondering, hey, why didn't we talk about this, or this? Check and see, hey, did this happen after 3:30 p.m. on Thursday? And otherwise, that's your answer. But something that we know happened, and it's it's an interesting conversation to have. The Saints' two biggest moves, in my opinion, and Justin Reid signing is obviously a big move, but these two decisions, in my opinion, are the biggest moves that the Saints have made, and they are 3-year contract extensions for both defensive end Chase Young, tight end Juwan Johnson. Chase Young's deal is worth $51 million. There's a maximum of 57 if the incentives are reached. Juwan Johnson's deal is worth $30 million. About $21 million of that is guaranteed. These deals have seemed to be polarizing for the reasons of I had higher expectations for these players than they have yet to achieve. And I get that. I do understand that. But here's the thing. When you are talking about free agent contracts, you are not signing a player for what they have done. You are signing a player for what you expect them to do. You're assigning them. You are not paying a player for what they have done over the past 3 years. You are paying a player for what you expect them to do over the next 3 years. It's as simple as I can put that, because I think that's kind of the gulf between where people are on Juwan Johnson and Chase Young and where the Saints are on Juwan Johnson and Chase Young, because the Saints are signing these players based on upside. And you can say, well, we've seen these players. We don't need to worry about upside. I disagree, because we're talking about a 25-year-old edge rusher who, walked in the door with major, major injury concerns, played in all 17 games, and you feel like has a ton of upside. He's just entering his prime. You effectively have bought his prime with a 3-year, $51 million contract. Juwan Johnson is a unique case as well for an opposite reason. Not, Chase Young came in with all the expectations in the world. Juwan Johnson walked in the door as a wide receiver. He played wide receiver in his first year in the NFL. He didn't convert till tight end until his second year in the NFL. And at that point, you're like, okay, can he even succeed as a tight end? He's got to gain weight. He's got to learn how to run all these different routes. He did that, right? Now, years 3, 4, 5, I think people went into it with higher expectations than you got, but you still kind of can see the upside in those players. Keep in mind, 50 catches, 548 yards, 3 touchdowns. Numbers aren't going to jump off the page at you, but you have to keep them in perspective of like what are tight end numbers? What are reasonable tight end numbers? They're not wide receivers. There's situations where guys get peppered with targets. Evan Engram, who would have been my second choice had Juwan Johnson left, ended up signing with the Broncos for a 2-year, $23 million contract, with $16 million of which is guaranteed. And I mean, these contracts, people want to look at the total number and say, oh, he signed a $30 million contract versus a $23 million contract. Well, I mean, I would argue that $23 million over 2 years is more than $30 million over 3 years, but it's not a math problem I want to get into. Either way, Evan Engram got peppered with 114 targets in his first year with the Jaguars. If you're giving Juwan Johnson 114 targets, he's going to put up some numbers, right? So a lot of it is usage based. You have to look at, okay, who's getting open, who's not getting open, but what are the hands? I had someone tell me Evan Engram has better hands. I grew up watching the Giants. I've watched a lot of Evan Engram. There's highlight reels out there that are technically low light reels of like some of the worst drops you will ever see. He's a guy who makes spectacular catches, but doesn't make the kind of simple catch. Anyway, I don't know why I have a tangent on Evan Engram that I always get off on. And I'm a big fan of Evan Engram. I just don't think that he's that good. All right. Juwan Johnson, right? 50 catches, 548 yards, 3 touchdowns. 548 yards led the Saints last year in receiving. Now, obviously, their entire wide receiver room disappeared halfway through the season. Chris Olave would have been far and away the leading receiver. Alvin Kamara ended up being the second leading receiver on the team. MVS was kind of creeping up, but he didn't have enough time to get there. 548 yards, ranked 15th in the NFL among tight ends. 15th. There are 32 teams in the NFL. Every team has a tight end, right? Every team has a player with the potential to go out there and put up numbers as a tight end, right? A lot of teams have 2. The Saints had 2. Foster Moreau ate into Juwan Johnson's target share. So you can't say like he's the featured tight end in that offense. Foster Moreau, put up some pretty good numbers in his own right. But we're talking about a guy who was 15th in the NFL in receiving yards at the tight end position, which means you have a top half tight end, right? The math there makes sense. So it's not like those numbers are nothing. I think they could easily be higher. I think they should be higher. But you played half the season with a rookie quarterback and no wide receivers. So Juwan Johnson ended up being your top target. You're the guy that the other team was probably focused on, especially once Alvin Kamara went out. Who you throwing to? Who's your offense? It's Juwan Johnson. So I don't know. I don't have an issue with the Saints paying Juwan Johnson. I do have an issue with the idea that every player that people haven't watched is better than the player they have watched. And that always drives me nuts. Because, people argue with me, Dawson Knox is a better tight end than Juwan Johnson. Well, Dawson Knox and Juwan Johnson now make the same amount of money, right? Juwan Johnson and Noah Fant make the same amount of money. And people will say, well, Noah Fant's a better tight end. Is he? Over the last 3 years, they both appeared in about 40 games. They both put up about 1,400 yards. Noah Fant has, I think, 5 touchdowns. Juwan Johnson has 14 touchdowns. So would you rather have the first round pick who came in with all the expectations and all the opportunity and did not deliver, or the UDFA who's getting better? And I think that's what you do when you're a team that is rebuilding. You have to pay the players with upside. You have to avoid creating new money for players that will not be here on the other side of it. And you have to, make sense what makes sense. The Saints have reworked the deal of Cam Jordan. They've reworked the deal of Tyrann Mathieu. I think it's mainly just turning base salary into incentives, which will help them somewhat in their cap situation. The other thing, obviously, with these deals is the Saints were due $9 million against the cap in dead money when Chase Young's contract voided. Extending him not only allowed you to push that money forward. His base salary for the 2025 season is under $2 million. So that freed up a good bit of space. Juwan Johnson was going to count $6 million in dead cap if his contract voided. Signing him to an extension allows you to move that forward. So, it's just a sensible play. And the only reason that I think a lot of people hate these signings is because you watched them play rather than the guy you imagined play. But this is what Deuce McAllister had to say when he was asked about Juwan Johnson specifically on WWL this week.
Continue to ascend. Injuries, I think, have slowed you down. You can be a dominant tight end. This offense is based off of 12 personnel, so you're going to be on the field a ton. Now it's about you just continuing to dominate and really taking that next step. Hopefully injuries kind of are out the way for you. You're talking about a guy that was undrafted receiver, changed to a tight end, and at times has looked fantastic. Hopefully he can continue to ascend and, kind of give the Saints one of those weapons. And, I know some of the numbers out there. I wouldn't be surprised for the Saints to kind of draft a tight end this upcoming year. The question will be, will it be with one of your, kind of top 100 picks? There's a ton of different guys out there as far as body types and types of skill sets that I think fits this offense. It just depends on where they want to go with that position.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I would like to see the Saints draft a tight end. I've been begging the Saints to draft a tight end for years now. They just refuse to do it. But I still think Juwan has a lot to offer, right? The frustrating thing with Juwan is you see the flashes of potential, but it's not always there. But if you can flash it, that means it's there. Like if you can do something one time, you can do something every time. And I think that's the key is just finding ways to get more consistency out of him. I think Kellen Moore's offense should be able to help him, right? Like I think that's one of the reasons you wanted to bring Juwan back is you feel like, okay, I can get that guy more impact in Kellen Moore's offense than I was able to in Clint Kubiak's offense, right? The other thing about Juwan is he's a willing blocker, and while he's not the best blocker in the world, tight ends are never going to be your top blocker. That's why you have a blocking tight end. If you have a receiving tight end and he's a great blocker as well, fantastic. There aren't that many of those. But what you do need your receiving tight end to be is a willing blocker and a guy who is going to work hard. A guy who's going to put his body in there and he might get beat, but he's going to do enough. And Juwan is he's not lazy, right? Like he's going to get out there and do the work and we'll see. Like I don't think Juwan is a guy who's going to see I got paid now, I'm not going to do the work. And there are guys out there like that. I'm not naming names or anything, but I'm okay with giving a guy who's earned everything to a contract to say, hey, we're gonna commit to you, we're gonna pay you. Now we need you to deliver. I think there's 1,000-yard season in that body. It's just a question of how many targets you're gonna get him. And to this point in his career, he has never been kind of a high target share guy. Going back to Chase Young, we talked to Chase Young today, and one thing that he made clear is like, hey, I want to be here. I want to be in New Orleans. Like I like it here. I think it's worked out well for me here. They committed to me. He said he texted Mickey yesterday and said, hey, thanks for believing in me. And, I think that does mean something. One thing Chase said is that, playing in 17 games that last season wasn't easy, right? Like it, when you walked in the door, you knew you had to have neck surgery and that impacted your market. That's why you only got a 1-year, $13 million contract on the table and you took advantage of it. And what I think Chase has made an investment in is himself, right? This is Chase talking about coming back from injury last year.
Like you guys, a lot of people don't really understand. After I got my surgery, I had to sit down for 3.5 months, like do nothing, like bump on the log. Like I had a month to prepare for training camp. Like, so I mean, to go out there and to do what I did, I mean, that's why I ain't wasting no time this off season. So, still my fire's still lit. So, it's on.
Yeah, and that's true for both these guys. If you remember, Juwan Johnson had to have foot surgery in the offseason, right? In a year where you're coming in, you're learning a new offense, you're trying to figure out what's going on. Neither of these guys was able to get out there on day one and actually learn the new system. They had to come in, kind of hit the ground running. And I don't think either of them was at their best on day one. They both played in all 17 games. So I think that's telling of the commitment level. Juwan, I watched him out there every day doing the work before practice, after practice, looking like Demolition Man out there with the orange hair. And I just think if you can get a full offseason out of these guys, I think they'll have a much better chance for success. I also think that Chase, when you're talking about young players, I think a lot of these guys come into the league and they feel like bulletproof, like their ligaments are made of rubber. They're all flexible all the time. They can eat a bag of Cheetos and then go out in the field and they're perfect. But as you get older, and this only happens once you get out of college, as you get older, you got to take care of your body a little more. You got to be more aware of what you're doing and what you're putting in your body and how you're taking care of yourself. Chase said he spent $30,000 on I think it's PEMF machine, which is just kind of you sit there and it helps you with inflammation and muscle soreness. And he just has this at his house now. Like he's just dropping $30,000 on a machine that can help him at his home. And I asked him about that, and this is what he said. Learning how necessary that is to invest in your body like that. Is that something you've picked up over your time in the NFL? Have injuries kind of helped you get to that point?
Yeah, I guess you could say that for sure. I mean, I feel like I've always been invested in my body. I would say also too, I wouldn't have made a purchase like that my rookie year. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely getting into these. I'm going on year 6 now. So You just gotta, depend on how long a guy say he wants to play. You gotta invest in your body.
Have you found that that's an investment that you have seen from other players? Like, is that kind of what led you to do that, or was that just you wanting to do that for yourself?
Me just want to do that myself. I try to look up a lot of stuff that helps my body. If it's mentally, if it's physically, I'm definitely doing research and things like that.
Yeah, and so like I think that is something that as a young talented player who comes in feeling bulletproof, there's a point where you have those injuries and you're like, okay, I gotta watch a guy like Demario Davis. I gotta learn from a guy like Cam Jordan, and then you kind of figure out how to exist at the NFL level. And I think it sounds like Chase is getting to that point. He's in a comfortable situation. His family likes it here. You mentioned a couple times that his family likes New Orleans, and I believe him because I'm on the sideline for these games, and a lot of times you'll see people who like that's got to be a relative of so and so, right? Like they look just like each other. Like you see Chris Olave's brother walking around, but like they could trade places like the Morris twins in the NBA, and you'd never know. Like, wait, is that which Olave is that? Anyway, Chase Young's dad looks just like him. And the only question is, okay, what relative is it? Is it an older brother? Is it an uncle? But I know it was Chase's dad because he always wears a Saints jersey that has 99 and says Chase Dad like on the back. Like that's what it says in the nameplate is Chase Dad. I thought it should have said Chase Old personally, but hey, it is what it is. But no, every game, home game, road game, follows him around. And, I think he's just a guy that structure is important to him, that, that family vibe in any team setting is important to him. And I believe him when he says they like it here and I like it here. And, Chase was also asked about, what are the vibes for this upcoming season? This is what he had to say.
I think everybody's really excited. Just knowing the history of the few coaches that especially at least on defense, I'm just knowing the history. It definitely gets us as a defense excited. Just a fresh start. That always feels good as well.
What do you think of Kellen Moore?
I know he's gonna have that offense pumping. I know that.
A defense's best friend is an offense that's pumping. But no, I think you're gonna see Brandon Staley come up with a plan for Chase Young, and I think you're gonna see Chase Young be productive. How productive? I think that's tough to say. I think there's double-digit sacks in there for sure. But again, you're talking about a 25-year-old guy who, with health, is probably just scratching the surface of what he can do. So again, I have no issue with that. Like people say, they're spending money. This is what a rebuild is, guys. Like you're not adding new money. You are massaging old money to make it work for you. And you're gonna play it out. Like you're gonna try to go win games this season. It's the only way. That's the job, to go win games, right? And I think you have set up a scenario, in my opinion, where you have a chance to go win games this year. Like you have a quarterback, you have a defense with playmakers on it, you have an offense with a star running back who could still get the job done. He's getting up there in age. You have wide receivers who can get the job done, both coming back from injury. There are question marks there. I think you do need to add to that room. Now, what that's going to look like, I don't know. I don't think you're done yet. But I think you do have a system where, okay, this is a weak division. We're going to get a fourth place schedule. There's going to be a lot of wins on that schedule, right? Or I take it back. There's going to be a lot of winnable games on that schedule. Like a fourth place schedule exists for a reason. It's because the NFL wants parity. So, you get lucky, a couple of these games where the ball bounced the wrong way in the past, the ball bounces your way. Maybe your new director of sports performance, Ted Rath, can come up with a system where guys aren't getting hurt left and right. If you get good injury luck and you go win a few games and you kind of create a scenario where you do feel like you can win, great. If you don't, if the season goes down the tubes, then I think you're in a really good position where you can continue to move on from guys and figure it out from there. But I'm okay with how the Saints are operating because I see a team that is rebuilding. Now, I think when people hear the term rebuild, they think if I'm not cutting every veteran I have, if I'm not tearing everything out root and stem, going down to the studs, then it's not a rebuild. This is a rebuild. This is a functional rebuild for the Saints where you unwind the salary cap down to a reasonable number, you keep a competitive roster on the field, and you see what happens. They're still under the cap for next year. This is one of the first times in a long time the Saints have both been under the cap for this year and next year at the same time. There's going to be dead money charges that's going to hit, and that's going to change things. But I think if your concern is that the Saints aren't rebuilding, I disagree, because I think that's exactly what this is. And I think signing young players who you feel like are, as Deuce put it, still ascending to 3-year contracts is par for the course for a rebuild. But all right, let's move on from that. We're going to come back. We're going to hit a mailbag. So if you have any comments, questions, I have several starred already, but we're going to get to as many as possible. Again, I'm Jeff Nowak. This is Inside Black and Gold, just catching up on all the free agency action that we've seen over the last few days. If you want to hear more from Chase Young, before I forget, he's going to be on Sports Talk at 420 chatting with Mike Detillier. So tune in. You can catch it on the Audacy app. I'll definitely grab that interview and throw it on the YouTube channel so y'all can listen to it later on if you'd like. But if you want to hear it live, that'll be at 420. Otherwise, stick around here. We're going to come back and hit a mailbag. Who dat? Go Saints. We'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Didn't make you wait too long because I was proactive. I got most of the comments starred in advance. But if you do have more comments, questions, throw them in there. We'll try to continue to get to as many as possible. But let's not waste any time. Again, I'm Jeff Nowak. This is Inside Black and Gold, catching up on free agency. Jerry G is always here. He says, well, it's been a while since y'all did a live. Charles Como says, hey, I caught you live. Yeah, we haven't been doing a lot of lives. It's just a schedule thing. A lot of the time is, I try to catch, Steve obviously hosts Sports Talk every day. So we kind of have to get to these at a certain time. And it's, a lot of times it's just easier to, catch him and then add elements. And I don't like doing lives unless I have content to share. Right. And getting that content set for a live is daunting when it's often easier to let's record and then I'll go in afterward and add those elements. So that's part of the reason we don't go as live as often as we probably would like to. But I do appreciate everyone who's here always because y'all are great. Y'all ask great questions. Let's go to Brian Cap, who says, what do you expect with those 6 picks in the first 4 rounds? Skill guy, O-line, D-line, edge, DB, linebacker, one of each, multiple picks at one spot. It's going to sound like a cop-out. I don't think you can look at it that way. I really don't. I think it's got to come down to who's on the board, right? I think I would love to see an offensive lineman. I really do think they need one. Again, Will Clapp's coming in. Will Clapp's not your starting left guard. You don't have a starting left guard right now. You haven't signed a starting left guard. It's tough to find those guys. Last year, you signed Lucas Patrick. He ended up being your starting left guard. Nick Saldiveri, maybe, but guy has proven repeatedly that he cannot stay healthy. So I don't know how you can walk into this season and be like, he's definitely our starting left guard. I think you need a veteran option. Maybe you draft a guy in the top 3 rounds. Maybe you don't. I've kind of said my piece on the first round running backs. I don't really love a top 10 running back. I don't really love a top 10 tight end. I think it would be fun if you got one, but it's not what I would endorse. I think you need a cornerback. I think you need a top cornerback. If Will Johnson's on the board, I'm going and getting him. I think he has a lot of Marshawn Lattimore vibes in how he's being talked about and how he's being kind of projected. It's the last time the Saints picked around that range. That's who they got, was Marshawn Lattimore. I don't think anyone regrets that decision, even though in the moment it's like, ooh, getting a cornerback. I don't know. It's never as exciting to get a pick on the defensive side of the ball. Edge rusher, I will never complain about a top 10 edge rusher. I just need it to not be out of a small school in Texas, If I'm taking an edge rusher out of Texas, they better be an A&M edge rusher, right? I like Michael Williams, Scouton's probably too high for him. These are these Georgia guys I'd be fine with. But it's tough. I can never go into a draft and saying, well, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, because it's always going to come down to what's on the board. I don't think there's a quarterback here. I know people love Jackson Dart. What I hear about him repeatedly from guys who know what they're talking about is they just don't think he processes as well as he needs to at the quarterback position to be a viable NFL starter. And that's honestly, like, arm talent's great. Arm talent's fantastic. You can make these dime throws, you can do whatever. Like, that's the part of it that you can't get past. Like, if you either have that or you don't, to a certain degree. Like, you can learn NFL concepts, you can learn a lot, but processing speed is kind of just something you either have or you don't. And so we'll see. Like, he's not there at 9. I could see him getting picked in the first round. I think someone could fall in love with him. But we'll find out. Either way, I don't think the Saints are going to go get him, because if you're not taking a guy at 9, I don't think you're taking a guy at 40, and I don't think he's going to get past 40. Maybe maybe Jalen Milroe if you get into the 4th round and Jalen Milroe's still there and you really want to take a flyer on him. Heck, maybe with one of your 3rd round picks. But we'll see. Either way, thank you for the question. Rosenfeld 10 says we still need pass rushers, edge rusher, outside linebacker are still huge needs for the draft, and defensive back in some form would be nice. Yeah, it's tough to say right now just because I don't know exactly what Brandon Staley is going to do with this scheme, and B, which Saints players actually profile well into an outside linebacker role. I think that Isaiah Foskey could profile well into an outside linebacker role, but I need to see him do it, right? I need to see him on the field. And, Cam Jordan put out a tweet, which Cam's coming back. He did make that clear. He reworked his contract. He put out a tweet that name-checked Foskey, and everyone's like, Foskey? No way. And I don't know. Like, I'd like to see Isaiah get chances. That's the thing that's like, everyone tells me that Isaiah Foskey is terrible. But, like, what are you basing that on? Honestly, like, what are you basing that on? Because everyone told me Zach Bond was terrible. You can go rewrite history if you want, but people were constantly telling me that Zach Bond was terrible. And the reason he wasn't getting on the field is that he was terrible. And I don't know if that's necessarily true, huh? Because when he got chances in a role that suited him, he was pretty good. Now, I'm not saying that Isaiah Foskey is going to be an all-pro outside linebacker in the NFL, but I do get a kick out of people telling me that this guy is terrible and you've never watched him play. He hasn't gotten chances to play. And obviously, I'd love to see him earn chances to play, but that was a problem last year. Is okay, you have Carl Granderson, you have Cam Jordan, you have Chase Young. All these guys played over 17 games. I think Peyton Turner was here last year. So I think, Peyton Turner, I don't think I mentioned Peyton Turner. He went to the Cowboys. So, I think there is an opportunity here for Chase Young to for Isaiah Foskey to step into a bigger role, and maybe he can contribute. I don't know. Like, it's weird when a guy's not playing and he's just a special team contributor. Everyone talks about him as if he's trash, when it's like, I don't even know what are you watching to say he's trash. Anyway, so we'll see. I'm optimistic that you can get opportunities for Isaiah Foskey this year. And maybe he's in his head. Maybe he doesn't have it. Either way, this is the season where I need to see something. Because year 3, if you don't make any contribution by year 3, then sure, we can call you a bust. If your first 2 years are kind of, redshirt seasons basically, where you're learning on the job, and then year 3 you kind of break out a little bit, then you can say, hey, okay, well, this is a trajectory I can live with. So we'll find out. Either way, that wasn't your question, but all right, let's go to the top. Christian says, wide receiver, running back, OL, no tight end in the first round. Yeah, I could agree with that. Charles Como says, is there a punter on the market that's worth signing? So here's an interesting thing. And, we talked to Dante Pettis. Austin Pettis is Dante Pettis' cousin. Funnily enough, Austin Pettis was teammates with Kellen Moore at Boise State. So, I don't think the reason the Saints re-signed Dante Pettis is because Kellen Moore is good friends with his cousin, but it probably didn't hurt. But why I brought up Dante Pettis is, one of the reasons that you're bringing back familiar special teams guys is because you were bringing back a familiar special teams coordinator in Phil Galliano, who was here last year and is comfortable with the guys in the room, right? So I don't think you are going to change punters. I think you might bring in someone to compete with Matthew Hayball, but I don't think you're gonna be like, we got to go find a punter. I think you're gonna feel like, hey, Matthew Hayball is a guy that we can work with. Same with Blake Groupie. Charlie Smith, I bet, is going to get a chance. Whereas if you change special teams coordinators, all bets are off, right? Dante Pettis, I don't know, who knows, right? Blake Groupie, who knows? Maybe this guy has a kicker he really likes, who's on the market, and I'm going to go get him. Same with a punter. So I don't think you're going to see a change at punter unless you have a competition and Matt just doesn't win it. But I do think that, like, if you're a special teams coordinator, you want continuity. You don't want to be bringing in rookie punters every year and dealing with that volatility of like, and Darren Rizzi isn't around to scream at the guy on the sideline anymore. So I don't think you're gonna change punters. All right. Pelicans Nola says, looks like we're finally drafting Louisiana players on the Saints. We're signing Louisiana players. Okay. We can definitely say that the Saints seem to have changed their tune in terms of free agent Louisiana players, trading for Louisiana players. Tyrann Mathieu, Foster Morrow, Devon Godchow, right? Will Clapp, all LSU guys. Justin Reid, the Louisiana guy. But to this point, they have not drafted any. Like, they had a chance to draft Tajay Spears a couple years ago. Everyone knows that. Everyone's mad about that. They didn't do it, right? Will Clapp is an LSU player they drafted, took him in the 7th round. So, we'll see if they draft an LSU player. I would love to see him draft Will Campbell. I would love to see him draft Mason Taylor. But until I see it happen, I'm still going to believe that they something in the draft process sends them away. 504 Coast says, how does Cooper Kupp work in this offense? I'm hearing the Saints are interested. Yeah, I think what's going to end up happening with Cooper Kupp is I'm sure the Saints are interested, but I'm sure his market's going to get too high. And it just doesn't make sense. I also, there's some stats out there that do not bode well for Cooper Kupp. And, I have this kind of running theory that whenever you see a receiver have one of these crazy usage seasons, they are almost never the same again after that season. Like, you look at Michael Thomas, that 140 something catch season, right? Look at everything he did after that point. Cooper Kupp, same thing. Marvin Harrison, back with the Colts. He had the record before Mike Thomas took it. Look at his career before that season and after that season. So I just don't know if Cooper Kupp is the same guy, because we saw the Saints play the Rams each of the last 2 seasons. You know who did not impact those games? Cooper Kupp. It was all Puka Nacua, right? And Demarcus Robinson. Cooper Kupp was not the problem for the Saints in those matchups. So I don't know. I think it would be fun because Jake Kupp is in the Saints Hall of Fame, Cooper's grandfather. So it would be kind of a fun little reunion, if that's the word. I think he would kind of fit what they want to do. I mean, he's just a guy that gets open, or he used to be a guy that gets open. It hasn't been so much the last couple of years. So I don't know. I'm not going to go down the Cooper Kupp rabbit hole until it's here. Mr. Wallace says, I hated to see Yiadom go in the first place. He's a solid player. I agree. I think, it's funny because everyone last year was angry that Ike Yiadom left. And then this year, everyone's angry that Will Harris left. And then they bring Ike Yiadom back. And the people who were angry that Ike Yiadom left don't seem to be happy that Ike Yiadom is back. But no, I think he's a good depth guy. I was disappointed to see him go too, because I think he just works hard. He's a special teams guy. He's going to be a contributor there. So even if he's not on the field all the time, you can do that. I think, it's tough to project what he's going to be in this scheme, but he is an outside corner. So I don't expect him to factor into the slot. And, if you do want to move Alante into the nickel, I think you did successfully 2 years ago, a little more so than this last year, then I feel good about it. Rosenfeld 10 says, Alante Taylor's a start. Nickel is a solid outside cornerback. I have faith he can succeed on the outside, but we have proof he is a team MVP. at the nickel. Yeah, I mean, I just think that you can find nickel corners, and I think that's why they don't get paid, right? So, like, I think there's a point where you need an outside corner a lot more than you need a nickel. I think a lot of outside corners could shift in and play nickel. They don't want to. It's a want to thing. So we'll see. I wouldn't mind drafting a young player who you think can go play the nickel, who can be a dedicated nickel guy, right? Because I just think I don't know. I want a bigger physical guy to play that position than Alante. We'll see. Justin Pasquale says, I'm loving what the Saints are doing. We are actually under the cap and can sign some people, and as of now, under the cap for the next 2 years. Yes, I agree with that. These signings and re-signings allowing our first round pick to be wide open, though it's looking more and more like wide receiver or some offensive playmaker being our first pick. Yeah, it's an interesting point because, last year I don't think the first round pick was wide open as you put it. Like last year it was like, if there's an offensive lineman on the board, you better go get him, right? And Taliesin Fuaga ended up being there. You got him. He threw him at left tackle. He played well. You feel good about it, right? I don't think that's the case this year, right? I don't think that there's a position of need to the level that, man, if that guy's on the board, you got to take him, right? Even if he's not your top graded player. There's obviously positions of need, but not positions of desperate need. I still think you can upgrade at right tackle. I still think you can definitely upgrade at left guard, but you're not taking a guard in top 10. I don't know. Maybe a kicker. Maybe they can get a kicker at number 9. How about that? You're going to talk me into Ashton Genty. I know you are. Either way, I want to get excited about something. So maybe I'll just throw caution to the wind and take my kicker and complain about it the entire way. But as long as he's not winning a Super Bowl with the Falcons in 2025. So in like 2031, that's what I don't want to be in that scenario. If I draft a running back in the top 10 and he's winning a Super Bowl in my city in 6 years, I will be very, very upset about it. Eugene Sutherland says, greetings from South Philly, boys. It's hard out here for a who dat pimp these days. I can imagine. I can only imagine. I don't even know what a who dat pimp would be, but happy for you. Rosenfeld 10 says, I would have offered Adebo a 3-year, $42 million deal with $30 million guaranteed. Yeah, I mean that would have been a big deal. That would have been a big contract. I didn't get the sense that the Saints were going to match anything that was like, full market for a guy coming off a significant leg injury. And my question for Adebo, and I don't have a satisfactory answer for this, is how good is he in like a zone heavy scheme, like a zone match scheme? Because we just haven't really seen him play in it. And that's the thing. Like I love Paulson Adebo. I think he's a great player. He's a press man cover corner, right? He does that as well as anybody in the league, and that's why you had him across from Marshawn. That's not what he would be asked to do in a Brandon Staley defense. Yes, there's going to be press man principles, but that's not going to be your bread and butter the way it was in Dennis Allen's offense. So I'm sorry, Dennis Allen's defense. So like, I think that did kind of eat into the confidence of paying that much when I'm just not sure how he's going to fit. And I have 2 young corners under contract that I do want to see. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. D Ranger says, ran it back. Mickey is at it again. I see, but I guess we are in a wait and see approach about the upcoming season. I don't know. My kind of thing is if you're already mad about the season before it gets here, then you're going to be mad about the season when it's here. Like if you like, to me, fanhood is all about hopeless optimism and irrational optimism. Like I've always hated the idea that we need to be negative about everything. I think that's why, I'm a contrarian by nature, right? Like people think I'm just a dick online and I'm just trying to be a dick and trying to cape for the team. Like my thing is I'm just trying to have a conversation about sports, and sitting there and agreeing with everyone is not a productive conversation, right? So a lot of times I'll just come in and take the unpopular land and plant my flag on it and defend it, because that's just what a sports debate is. Now, the problem I find is that everyone I encounter on Twitter, which is a cesspool, and it is what it is, wants to be negative about every single thing. So my only position can be, it's not as bad as you think it is. And that's also the more rational place to be because it's almost always true. If people were irrationally excited about everything, I would be the opposite. I would be like, yeah, maybe this isn't a good idea. I'm not going to just yes and you. But I don't know. I'm going to wait and see approach because I'm always going to go into the season saying, how can things go well as opposed to everything sucks all the time. Let's be mad about it. So that's kind of where I'm at. All right. Let's see a few more. Let's look at some of the newer comments that just came in. Michael Mitchell says, we really don't want Carr, let alone Renfro. LOL. Oh, so you're talking about Renfro. Carr doesn't want to be here, so I say screw Carr. Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard from Derek. That's probably one of my bigger things. It's like, where is he? Why haven't we heard from him at all? Anyway, it's from a Renfro perspective. I don't know if there was a comment. So someone says, sign Renfro, make DC happy. I don't think Renfro wants to play. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure that Hunter is like retiring. Because if he wanted to play, he would be on a roster. Right? Like, I don't think that he's sitting there waiting for the bat phone to ring. I think he just is, he's tired. Like, he's not trying out for teams. He's not showing up in any, like, I don't get the sense that Hunter wants to play. So either way, Rosenfeld 10 says, I predict Pete Warner to move into inside linebacker in a 3-4 due to his lack of pass rush ability. Man, we need edge rushers. Yeah, I think DeMario and Pete are going to be your inside linebackers. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what you're going to have. And then the question is going to be who kind of plays those stand-up outside linebacker roles. But here's the thing, and this is what Brandon Staley said, and this is what even Chase Young said today. Like, you live in nickel. You're playing 70% of your snaps in nickel. And a 3-4 in the nickel is pretty much the same as a 4-3 in the nickel. Like, you got to be able to play 5 defensive backs. So, I don't know how, it's like we're going to spend so much time talking about the base defense for Brandon Staley and how it fits. And in reality, it's like that's not the most important element of that defense. So we'll find out. But, I do think that, Werner and DeMario Davis are going to be your inside linebackers. And it is kind of strange because I do think you need another one. At least, maybe you're looking at Anthony Orji or Jalen Ford and saying we like those guys as options. But DeMario's 36 and they restructured his contract. I don't think DeMario has any intention of leaving. So are the Saints going to push him out the door eventually? Or are they just going to keep rolling it back? When I asked Brandon about some of the veteran players, I did think his answer was telling, like, no, those guys are going to plant the flag for you, is what he said. Like you want those guys. You want a player like that. And as long as they still see him as a productive player, I think he's going to be around as long as he wants. He wants to play 1 year longer than LeBron. So whatever that means, we will see. Pelicans Nola says the first to 100th pick need to be impact players for the Saints. I agree with that. You got to draft impact players. Justin Pasquale says, lucky for the Saints, the wide receiver draft is pretty solid. So if we don't take one in the first, we can definitely get one in the second or one of our thirds. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's either if it's at 9, it's Ted McMillan or no one. I don't know if there's this isn't, it's funny because last year in 2022, the wide receiver class was insanely strong, right? Like all those first round wide receivers. Even last year, you had a guy like Marvin Harrison up there at number 4. It's like a strong number 4 overall pick. Malik Neighbors in the top 10. You don't have those kind of like top end wide receiver prospects other than Ted McMillan. And I think if Ted gets there at number 9, then you're going to have a hard time saying no. At least I would. But outside of the number 9, there becomes a lot of really impressive guys. I think Jaden Higgins is still the guy that I look at is out of Iowa State. He's a bigger dude. He can move. I would love Ted. I just, skill positions are tough. Like you just don't see the Saints use top picks on skill positions. Rosenfeld says wide receiver Matthew Golden isn't the size profile needed, but he is a playmaker. I agree with that. Ransom Antoine says, what if Rattler beat out Carr in training camp? What if he runs that offense better? I mean, then I think he would start at quarterback. I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think it's going to be a true competition. Now, like, and I did have another mailbag. It wasn't just a Rattler mailbag thing. See, I have two. But you know, I think for me, I think it's more important to say, okay, Spencer, learn the, like, if I'm Spencer, I am not worried about beating out Derek, right? And he shouldn't be worried about beating out Derek. Spencer should be worried about learning the offense and proving to coaches that he is a viable backup quarterback, right? Because right now, I don't think that that's a guarantee. I don't think that is a given that he is going to be looked at as, well, he's definitely the backup. Because I think this team might say, hey, we want a veteran backup. Derek Carr has missed multiple, or I guess he hasn't missed multiple games, but he missed 7 games. No. Yes, he missed 7 games last year. He was hurt a lot the year before, right? Like, and in the 7 games he missed last year, you went 0-7. Would you have gone 0-7 with a veteran backup option? I don't know, but I'm going to consider that. And, you know, I don't think you necessarily need to keep Jake Haener around. If it like came down to it and you wanted to keep 3 quarterbacks and, you know, you cut Jake Haener and you keep a veteran Ben DiNucci type, not to say Ben DiNucci would be that guy, but like, I'm just first name that came to mind. You know, he worked with Scott Linehan in the UFL. That's the only reason I feel like there's a connection there. Like, that's what Spencer needs to do to prove that he can stick on that roster. And once he does that, then you can talk about anything else. But if I'm Spencer Rattler and I'm going in with the goal of like, I'm going to win this starting job, I don't think that's going to be productive for him, because I think that learning a new offense for the second time in as many years is going to be priority 1, and ingratiating himself to the coach is going to be priority 1, so that when the opportunity arises for him to get on the field, he could potentially go win that job, right? Like, I don't think winning that job out of camp is really going to mean much, because this team's probably not going to be very good, right? And if it's bad, like a lot of people are expecting it to be, and you get into week 12 and the season's over, if I'm Spencer Rattler, I want to be having put myself in the position where the team's like, let's see what we have in that guy, right? So I think that's more important. And if he runs the offense well in camp, then he's putting himself in that position. But either way, thank you for the question. I do appreciate that. Miss MB says, does the recent free agent tight end signing from the Eagles and Juwan Johnson's contract not bode well for Taysom's future with the Saints? So we haven't gotten into Taysom, so let's get into Taysom. You know, we talked last episode about, okay, I thought the pay cuts would come down the line. What I overlooked in that conversation was Cam Jordan's contract had a deadline where a lot of his base compensation was going to be guaranteed. So you needed to get the contract reworked prior to that. I overlooked that detail. So his contract is done. Taysom's does not have that caveat in it. So I think you do stretch it out, and you're not worried about getting it done right now. You're just kind of going to continue that dialogue. And the reason for that is I don't need to have, you know, like Ryan Ramchek's contract. He's probably going to retire after June 1st, which means after June 1st, I'm going to have to find a way to clear $11 million in cap space, right? So that's what I would be targeting if I'm the Saints, is like, can we get something sorted out by then so that we can figure that out throughout the course of the season? Because that money's going to be that money either way. I would like to see Taysom get back into workouts before I try to commit to anything on his contract. Because what if he can't play at all, right? What if that knee just does not cooperate and he ends up missing the season? You have to put him on PUP, or he's, you know, like, we don't know what we don't know. So I don't think you want to agree to anything from a contract perspective until you kind of get that image of like, okay, this guy's going to be ready to play. He's going to be ready to do whatever. So yeah, I don't think that the Jack Stahl signing has anything to do with Taysom Hill, because Taysom's really not playing tight end that way. Like, Taysom is a tight end per se, like from a roster perspective. But what you ask him to do on the field is a lot more like a fullback. So I don't think that those two things are related. I think Jack is just going to be a guy you have as a potential blocking tight end. Like, think Nick Vannett a couple years ago. Like, that's who he's going to be, in my opinion. Mal says Twitter is the worst place for a conversation. Yeah, it's not a conversation. It's just people yelling at each other angrily. It's toxic. The funny thing is that I end up happening upon the Saints Reddit feed a lot, and there was once a time where Reddit was the crazy cesspool for negativity, and Twitter was kind of a halfway reasonable place where you could, sometimes you would end up in these like toxic, spin cycles, but a lot of times you would end up surfacing takes or information that, was positive and helpful. Now it's kind of gone the other way because Twitter, in its new iteration, has zero moderation, and you can pay for placement and you can pay for engagement, and it's now just a town square of people screaming one person louder than the next until there's nothing but angry white noise. Whereas Reddit actually has some moderation, and there's some sort of internal ranking where, hey, if you say something outrageous, it gets downvoted into oblivion and no one ever sees it because no one deserves to see it, and vice versa. So it's funny because like the way Twitter was set up when it was moderated was actually better than Reddit, but now that Twitter is a cesspool, Reddit's a better place. Anyway, I actually think the Saints Reddit channel is a good place for conversation. It's a much better place for conversations than subreddit, I guess is what you would call it, than Twitter is. Renfro is 28. Yes, I know Renfro is only 28, but some guys make it to 28 and they feel great. Some guys make it to 28 and feel like their knees are falling off. Remember, Hunter Renfro was a quarterback in high school. Hunter Renfro has been getting every rep in every football game since he was 12 years old. Hunter Renfro was an incredible athlete. And I know this because I actually covered Hunter Renfro in high school. I watched him at Socastee High School playing Georgetown. And he probably had the ball in his hands 35 times a game in high school, right? So like, I think he's not a big guy. And I think it's entirely possible that he's just not physically capable of playing at an NFL level right now, or at least doesn't feel that way. Because I don't think that he would you just disappear from the game of football unless you choose to disappear from the game of football in the way he has. Like, he could have ended up on a practice squad somewhere. Like, teams are always looking for veteran players to toss on a practice squad and potentially elevate. So I don't think Hunter Renfro, it's not like Hunter is sitting by the phone waiting for the call. Justin Pasquale says, you think Kyle McCord would win a backup battle over Rattler? A lot of buzz over McCord lately. Personally, I hope Rattler's ready to take over after next season. I'm not. I don't know a ton about Kyle McCord, if I'm being honest. I don't think you're going to have a backup battle this year the way you had a backup battle last year. I think you're probably going to bring in a veteran. But maybe you do. Maybe you draft a guy, like, again, if you drafted Jalen Milroe or somebody. But I do think this team is probably going to want a veteran. Like think of last year, the Eagles went and got Kenny Pickett as their backup quarterback. Now, he wasn't a veteran, but he was a guy who has started games in the NFL, and you felt a little more confident if you had to throw him in there. I think that's what you're going to try to find, is a guy who has started as an NFL player, has wins, and you'll probably keep Spencer as your developmental guy. But I don't know. I can't tell you high or low whether Kyle McCord would be better. Mal says, geez, people are stuck in the 2000s with their dated view of defensive fronts. 3-4 doesn't matter as much anymore. Yeah, I mean, the 2000s is funny because it's like 2000s to me isn't that long ago. But then you say like, oh man, it's the 2000s, the aughts. Anyway, I think you're right in the sense it's just very simple to look at it and say, okay, 3-4, 3 down linemen, 4 players behind them, right? Come on, that's all it is. But in reality, it's a lot of moving parts, and I think that's become kind of a placeholder for saying a 4-3. We know what they're going to do for the most part. Like, it's kind of simple and straightforward. Whereas a 3-4, there's dozens and dozens of variations of what you could throw out there. And I think that's like the complicated nature of it versus the straightforward nature of it. And it's easy to say, well, you need an outside linebacker, you need a nose tackle, you need this, you need this, you need this. It's what I think a 3-4 can do is adjust to the personnel a lot better than what a 4-3 can do. So when if you have a Chase Young and he's better suited as a down lineman, then you're going to play him as a down lineman. If you think he can play that kind of outside stand-up edge rusher role, then you're going to do it. But at the end of the day, inside players rush inside, outside players rush outside, right? Inside linebackers play inside, outside linebackers play outside. And it is what it is. But I do think that, like, yeah, we talk about 3-4 and we try to simplify it to Christian just says Saints just signed Hunter Renfrow to a 1-year deal. I don't believe you. Let's see. Nope. I think you're lying to me. How dare you? They did just announce the Yiadom contract. Just trying to mess with me. You know, that is like one of my fears, and you kind of hit on it there. It's like as I'm talking, something that I'm talking about happens, and then I have to like reverse course. But no, Hunter Renfrow apparently is working as a business development person for a recycling company. That's actually kind of funny. Anyway, we're here. This is the end. We've made it. We've made it. Yeah. See, I should have waited to see the cap. Yeah, hilarious. Anyway, no, Ryan McGee says would like to know if they sent an offer to Cup. Wish they would have tried to get D-Hop since he only got $5 to $6 million at Baltimore. I know we are not the Ravens. I'm still looking at Amari Cooper. I know he thinks New Orleans smells bad. He said it in like 2015 or 2014. Yeah, this is actually true. I just saw this. Hunter Renfrow, former Clemson star and current Raiders receiver, is preparing for life after football as he takes on a new role as a recycling ambassador for ESS Industrial in South Carolina. And that makes sense. He's from Saucony. But yeah. So we'll see how it goes. I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Been live for about 90 minutes. I appreciate everyone hanging out. I'm going to be live on Sports Talk. Actually, our show got canceled tomorrow. Steve just texted me that we don't have a show tomorrow. So I will not be live tomorrow, but we'll be coming back in early next week to kind of catch up if there's any more moves. Kind of probably do a mock draft now that we have kind of the first free agency wave in. We've only done one mock draft so far, so we do have some decisions to make. That was before Brandon Staley was a defensive coordinator. It was before a lot of these coaches were hired. So we'll get into that. But all right, I appreciate everyone for hanging out and listening. Again, my name's Jeff Nowak. This is Inside Black and Gold. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow my co-host Steve Geller over at Steve Geller WWL. He's also going to be live on Sports Talk in about an hour. Mike Detillier is on there now. I think they're talking to Chase Young as we speak. So definitely pop over there and listen to that. But otherwise, be easy, y'all. Peace. See you.